and expectations about world economics and about climate. And then we round those scenarios with and without various mitigation measures against flood risk, so mitigation in terms of building and flood management and so on. And these maps show where so basically the risk is getting higher, much higher over the years in where the dark spots are and less high where the green ones are. So it shows you the kind of distribution of future risks. And that was it took 2 years. It was quite a big investment into it. A couple of hundred scientists involved one way or another, and a lot of convening with politicians. It was not a big public debate. It was aimed at decision makers at the time, regulators, ministers and so on. The consequences of the work were that under all plausible scenarios, the risks went up so much that the evidence was used to justify extra investment in flood defence. So that was the 300 million extra investment in flood defence that happened on the spot. It was probably more importantly, that work was part of the evidence that underpinned the introduction of statutory carbon budgets in the UK, which is a legislative move towards limiting carbon pollution, which was quite a big deal in the sense that that was a novel thing to do. The modelling was it's been used in parts of China and in the US. We also created a game for public dialogue effects, and the graphics were still in use 10 years later. They were in the back of BBC reports of flooding on a different flooding event 10 years later. One of the many points about this, other than the fact that quantitative modelling can be done and it can be useful, is these are quite. If you are a normal citizen, a normal person in England and Wales, you look at this and you just can't help it. You go, well, my house is there. But what was actually really helpful was that when the government chief scientific advisor took it to the cabinet, so this is the prime minister, the head of the treasury, a politician's reaction is, my constituency is where, whatever. So it was deliberately the case that we use compelling and relatable graphic representations to express what was really a modelling a complex system. Because what we couldn't use was this. In fact, this is a systems map of a different foresight project. This is a systems map of what causes obesity, or all the factors affecting obesity. And this is an example of what not to use when you're thinking about evidence, about communicating or engaging with evidence. So you have to do it. It means it's really important stuff to do. But show it to a minister, present it in a public debate of some kind, and it's not useful of itself. What we did with this work on obesity is then begin to develop, in dialogue with experts, we developed a sort of more simplified set of headings. And then there was various forms of analysis, and the report which was used under government, it's quite the evidence about different causes and consequences of obesity. I mean, the story is, of course, obesity is a big problem, and there's some really big numbers about what it may mean. The problem with obesity is that systems map cuts across every departmental, every disciplinary boundary, and that makes tackling the questions really hard. And some of the value of the futures work and the systems map was that it forced a conversation. The systems map forces a conversation between the people who say, well, it's a health problem. I'm in the education department. Obesity is a health problem. They have to deal with it. Or in the health department, it's for goodness sake, we can't do anything about obesity. It's a poverty problem. Actually, it's for the treasury who deal with taxation and so all of that goes on the whole time. The systems map forces a discussion that doesn't acknowledge those boundaries, and that's the first thing. Because, and you can't see it from this, but the systems map was placed in 2040. So the other point was that although, as ever with futures work, the aim is to influence decisions now, the fact that we could all pretend that we were talking about 2040 meant that there were discussions going on that were more productive. Because instead of people thinking that the discussion was going to mean that the health budget was going to be increased, but it would be at the expense of the education budget the next time there was a budgetary statement. Instead of worrying about the very near term, win-lose, the participants, in a sense, kind of mutually consented to pretend that they were only talking about 2040, knowing that it was still going to have consequences in the present. Anyway. Right, so that was all somewhat rational. You've got your kind of, you've got your systems maps, you've got your, your foresight flood maps and so forth. There's then the kind of emotional and engagement. We did work at one point on cybersecurity. So bear with me, you have to do a bit of time travelling in this. In 2008, we did scenarios for 2018. I'm only telling this story because it does sound a bit funny, because it was one of the rare occasions when a government minister consented to go through scenario playing workshops in a futures context. It may happen all the time here, I don't know. Does it happen all the time here? It doesn't happen all the time in the UK, I can assure you. Most of the time you can't, ministers by and large are very uncomfortable with things that are labelled futures work. We had a minister who took part in discussions with these three scenarios that we developed about different worlds in which different forms of consensus about how information and data would flow, what privacy there would be, what kinds of security there would be. And what was true of all these, the details don't matter, I can talk about them later if it's helpful, but what was true, all the scenarios showed a common assumption that by 2018 it would be very commonplace for any citizen's location to be knowable. And if you think back, so stay with the time travel, if you think back, there was a time when that wasn't the common assumption. And the minister was making a decision about whether to introduce electronic tagging for prisoners. So this is the ankle bracelets that you put on, that mean you can track where a prisoner is, but they're not in prison. So they can get out of prison, which is by and large better for them, but you still know where they are. And the minister was concerned that knowing where somebody was would be socially stigmatising. Okay? So what this scenario showed was that even though it wasn't true at that time when she was making that decision, it was reasonable to believe that by the time the legislation had gone through and the thing was kind of widespread, almost certainly would be very commonplace for people to know where other people were, and therefore it would not be stigmatising for criminals to be tracked. Right, so I'm going to move on. Still thinking about futures and kind of modelling. This is, it's online. This is a simulation game that we developed from the model that you saw from the scenarios of flooding earlier on. So we took a bit of the UK, it's on the east coast, this bit here, so it's a real bit of land but anonymised, took the models and created a simulation game, just a kind of basic SimCity. And what you have to do, you the player are in control of the area, you make investment decisions about flood management, about economic growth, about housing and so on. And then it steps forward 10 years and gives you a set of outcomes depending on what the climate has been like over those 10 years. And you either get vote scores according to what the notional public think you have done. And the aim is to make decisions every 10 years such that you stay in power for 100 years and don't get voted out. And this then was used in public dialogue and public consultation by the Environment Agency in the UK, which has to deal with local communities and investment decisions in flood management. Its real power is in kind of democratising the difficulties of making decisions in a complicated system. So, for example, the same decision played on a different run of the game might cause you to win in one, but not win in another. Yeah. So if you put all your money in flood defences, one run of the game, it might be that because the climate is really bad, that's a really good thing to have done, and so you get lots of brownie points. But on the other hand, you put all your money in flood defences and you get quite a benign 10-year climate, you look like a fool, and your jobs and your economy's gone down, so you're voted out. And that, again, may seem obvious, but in the context of kind of contentious decision-making, it's the kind of thing that's quite helpful because it gets the debate away from saying you, the decision-maker, have to find the right answer. That must be right for the next 10 years, regardless, when maybe it might not be possible to have a right answer that will definitely be right for the next 10 years. Anyway. Now, going on a little bit more, just want to carry on with an element, kind of in a journey here from thinking about science and futures in the very quantified modelling, causation, complicated systems, so on, through to narrative. It's almost kind of back to badgers and the kind of the risk management and systems management of the countryside through the lens of badgers. This is correlation. Okay? So what we have here is there is a data set which contains English language transcripts of all films produced over the last 10 years. And this is for the hard of hearing and so on. And this chap at Cambridge took a machine learning system and ran it through all of the transcripts of films produced in the last 10 years. And looked for clusters of words, basically, clusters of words. So what this tells you is that films that have AI, artificial intelligence, in their plot in some way, also have plots that are concerned with control. Okay, so the plots are saying something like, who is controlling the AI? Is the AI controlling, is the artificial intelligence controlling me? Whatever it might be. And more so than some other things that you might think might also be kind of scary science. Okay, so there's something specific going on in popular filmmaking about control and artificial intelligence, which is interesting if what you're concerned about is, say, political decision making in the control of artificial intelligence, robotics,